Go ahead, I'm fine.
Okay, any public comment on the CSU budget?
Nora Lynn on behalf of the California Faculty Association. We're appreciative of the revise's additional $38 million and believe it's a step in the right direction, but it's not enough. And so we're grateful to the chairman and the committee for the additional $95 million for the CSU, as well as for treating our system equitably. However, we remain concerned regarding the number of prospective students who are turned away. There's money for enrollment growth, but there's nothing dedicated to increasing the tenure track faculty at the CSU, which we believe would increase both graduation rates and decrease time to degree for the students who are there. It's an issue that has been raised for the community college, and we believe it's applicable to the CSU as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Erica Romero on behalf of the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities. The CSU is the largest provider of four-year degrees to Latinos in the nation, so we appreciate that this committee has given the CSU money to enroll more students. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on now to a much smaller scope in issue number 11, eligibility study. And for this, the LAO and CSU will speak. I don't know if you finance have any comments on this. Eligibility study, let's start with the LAO.
Paul Golozewski again with the Legislative Analyst Office. One recommendation that our office has had the last 2 years in your committee is to authorize a new eligibility study. As you know, the master plan establishes eligibility pools for admission to UC and CSU. And UC is supposed to draw from the top 12.5% of freshmen and CSU from the top 33.5%. And the goal of this is to identify a pool of students that are eligible, that have access to the universities. In the past, the state used to conduct studies to determine what actual share of students the universities were drawing from. It conducted these studies typically every 3 to 5 years. The information was used in part just so the state could know, as well as so the universities could adjust their admissions criteria in response. If they're admitting too small of a share, they might change the GPA or SAT requirement to admit a larger share and vice versa. These studies used to be administered by the California Post-Secondary Education Commission, which was closed down in 2011. The last study dates back to 2007, more than about 8 years ago, so we don't have any recent information in this area. And as part of your plan that you'll take action on in issue 13, it would authorize a new study.
Thank you. CSU?
Yes. Generally speaking, I think the CSU is supportive of eligibility studies. I mean, that's what drives our decision-making process in terms of who we enroll. I think one of the things that that our folks back at the CSU Chancellor's Office have identified with an eligibility study is this notion, is this the correct time to do an eligibility study? We fully agree that there should be one. The question is, does it make sense to do it at this point in time? My understanding from my colleagues at the Chancellor's Office is that there is in place now an attempt by the ACT and SAT test developers, an attempt to rewrite and redo these tests, and that the first wave of these students that will be taking these tests will be in the spring of 16. Now, how does that really matter right now? Well, the issue is that if you do an eligibility study based on a number of these tests and eligibility based on this information now, what you could have is a study that is kind of static and is not actually factoring in what could change in terms of the future college-going population. So with that said, I just wanted to kind of park that out there as an idea. That does not mean that we cannot work going forward here if you do adopt this proposal in terms of working through all the details of that eligibility study. But I just wanted to kind of point that out as there are things that things that are moving right now. And right now, our analytics folks basically believe that it would be very difficult to just, at this point in time, just take a snapshot and do that enrollment study.
Thank you. Questions regarding the enrollment study? Seeing none, any public comment regarding the enrollment study? Seeing none, we'll move to item number 12. Item number 12, California Dream Loan Funding. And for this, we will start with the Department of Finance.
Thank you. As we said at the previous hearing, the
the governor's budget does not include a specific set aside for this program. We simply note that the universities both have existing authority to offer financial aid, including loans to this group of students. But we'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Elio?
We don't have anything specific to add. This is part of your package on issue 13, and I'll walk through it at that point.
Okay, UC?
Just to know, we're very proud to sponsor SB 1210. We estimate about 1,500 students would apply for the loan. Since the loan amount is capped at $4,000, and since there's a one-to-one match with the state, our estimate is would be about $3 million from UC in the first year.
CSU?
We were supportive when we talked about this issue a few hearings ago, and we still remain that. So we believe that our share would be about $1.7 million of it.
Thank you. Questions from senators? Seeing none, public comment.
Erica Romero on behalf of the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities. We supported SB 1210 and are glad to see the Senate support this. And I pretty much should have said, I love your budget package. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we will move on to item 13. And I think how we'll do this procedurally, we'll review the Senate plan for UC and CSU and either adopt or not adopt it. And then, assuming it's adopted, we will then, on each of the other items we've just heard, just move to conform them to the Senate budget plan. So item 13. Item 13 will begin with the LAO.
Sure. So item 13 of your agenda has the Senate's budget plan that you've heard about a couple of times now in this committee that puts it all together. I think it's listed as an attachment in your agenda. There's 2 pages. The first has the ongoing funding. The second page has the one-time funding. I'll start with the ongoing proposal and just outline the details of it. So the top portion of the chart shows you what the proposals are to spend the money on, and then the bottom portion tells you the funding source. And then below that, there's also some additional actions towards the very bottom. I actually think I'll start with the additional actions first. The additional actions for UC would be to approve the governor's $119 million augmentation that he had proposed in January. And it would also approve the governor's May revision proposal to provide the $96 million under Proposition 2 on a one-time basis. The augmentation, the 4% augmentation, would be contingent, however, on UC increasing non-resident supplemental tuition by 12% in 15-16, and by increasing California enrollment by 2,400 slots. And I'll go over those two a little bit more when we go up to the chart. The additional action would also have staff work with the LEO on one of our recommendations to formalize the reporting requirement for UC in terms of the various operational initiatives that you heard about earlier. And for CSU, the one action that's not listed in the chart above would be to approve the 4% base augmentation, the $119 million, and in addition to reinstate a line item in the budget. You heard about this issue a few months back, but there's a earmark in the budget for the Center for California Studies that the governor had proposed to get rid of, and this would reestablish it. So turning to the figure, the proposal, there's 9 sort of spending proposals in it. The first would be to create a new program, new graduation incentive grants for CSU students specifically. The estimated cost would be $50 million in the budget year. And the action would be to adopt placeholder trailable language to create this program. The second item, which you heard about earlier, is to maintain the Cal Grant Award for students at nonprofit colleges at the current schedule to prevent the decrease that's scheduled to happen under current law. And the associated cost is $11 million. The package includes increasing the number of competitive Cal Grants from 22,500 to 30,000, and that's estimated at $18 million. It funds enrollment growth at CSU of 10,000 slots, and that's at $74 million. It funds enrollment growth for California residents at the University of California with $24 million. And that revenue is associated with the expected increase in non-resident supplemental tuition. It provides $32 million for UC to expand academic quality, including student support services and course offerings. That funding, as I'll mention in a moment, is the funding that would be redirected by requiring UC to stop providing non-resident students with financial aid. There's another $75 million for CSU to expand support services and course offerings, $4 million for the UC labor centers, and $5 million for the Dream Loan program that we just mentioned. Those are all the spending proposals. And then to fund the package, the total for all that comes to $293 million. To fund it consists of four proposals. The first would be to phase out the middle class scholarship program, which we talked about earlier and was implemented this year for the first time. The proposal would grandfather in existing students receiving middle class scholarships. So if you received them this year, you would continue to receive it until you graduate. However, it would not authorize any new students to receive it. And in 15-16, that would be expected to save $104 million. As I mentioned earlier, it has the increase in non-resident supplemental tuition for UC. It also factors in the governor's May revision augmentation for CSU of $38 million. It includes an additional general fund augmentation above that of $95 million compared to the governor's May revision. And as I mentioned earlier, also requires the redirection of financial aid received by non-resident students at UC, which is $32 million. And the one-time is a bit simpler. On the next page, it consists of rejecting the governor's $25 million in one-time funding for the innovation awards that we discussed earlier, and it would direct $24 million one-time for CSU for deferred maintenance, and it would direct $1 million for a new eligibility study, which we just discussed earlier.
Okay, thank you. That was thorough. Department of Finance.
Sure, just some broad overarching concerns. We would oppose the package in large part because it provides significant levels of general fund resources above those appropriated in the May revision. For UC and CSU, it's consistent with our approach. We've opposed setting aside funds for specific purposes, and as we described earlier, have generally provided our expectations of the university and have given them flexibility to manage towards those expectations. We'd be happy to work with the committee on any reporting requirements included in your package, and we do oppose the rejection of the innovation awards.
Okay, thank you. Questions from members? Senator?
Christian, do you have a worksheet like this that you would submit to us as a counter?
I don't think I have a worksheet as part of kind of a negotiation. I think the best worksheet we would have are the proposals included in the May revision that we described earlier.
So then I'm having trouble with number 10, reducing the middle class scholarship. So that's a third of the funding for all this stuff. Is that what the governor's recommending?
The May revision funds the middle class scholarship with the appropriation that's included in existing law. So existing law specifies an appropriation level, and we don't propose any changes to that.
But the change is not a decrease of $104 million, is it?
My understanding of the Senate action would be.
So the proposed action included in your agenda, it's not a governor's proposal. It's a proposal for the committee from committee staff, and it would grandfather in existing middle class scholarship students. So this is the first year the state has the middle class scholarship. If you got an award this year, you would continue to get awards in the future, but no new students would get awards moving forward. So effectively, it would phase out the program. The savings associated with that are the $104 million,
Right.
relative to what's in the governor's budget, as you heard there.
Yeah, no, I got the email at 12:06 too, so I'm trying to just ask some basic questions. So I appreciate the answer. I'm just, you're finding sources and you're allocating them to expenditures. So I'm trying to, you have one problem anywhere on this this worksheet, then you're stuck, right? I mean, you
Well,
gotta
and
provide, you
I
gotta
guess-
provide alternatives, right?
I guess, as I said yesterday, the budget sub-hearings are really, they're the final step for the subcommittee, but they're the first step really in the budget process. There will be a full budget hearing on Friday, then there will be a conference committee where the Senate will bring its plan, the Assembly will bring its plan, and the two sides will, in conference committee, reach agreements on many of these items that are different from what we have now. That's part of what negotiating is all about. Then ultimately, the joint legislative group will meet both the speaker and the pro tem with the governor, and there'll be further negotiations. So this is not in any way a final, the budget won't look like this come June 15th. But these are important steps we're taking toward getting to a final budget.
Right, and I would think that this has been a healthy process, and we're not just rubber stamps, that
Clearly
we do
not.
want to add value, that we're just not waiting or passing it along to the next group, right? So we want to put some,
We've had probably 30 hours of meetings already as budget sub-1, not counting today and yesterday. So, we're clearly not just passing things along.
well, I've read everything, and this is the first time I've seen this today. So this is where we get to kind of put some input in. And again,
And
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
Mr. Chair, I'm an accountant, so I'm trying to say, okay, if I don't agree with 8 and 9, well, 9 million is easy to find, but if I don't agree with 10, where do you get 104 million?
And that will be part of what's ultimately figured out between all the parties when they get to final budget negotiations. I mean, if
So what am I doing here then? What am I,
you're taking public input, you're giving your best input back, and you are then giving our committee input to our subcommittee input to the budget committee as a whole, who then gives their input to the conference committee, who
so
then,
if I were to say, I don't like this worksheet, and I said, I don't like number 10, I for some reason, I think it's good to keep a middle-class scholarship, would I say that we change number 13 to 199?
you could, that's your option.
And then, okay, so how do I, if I said number 10 is 0, and then number 13 is 190, and then 8 and 9 are 0.
You
That
just
could
said
be-
it, that's on the record, so
So-
we'll see what the conference committee does
Okay,
with that.
great, then that'll help balance things out.
Good, very
All
good.
right. Okay, thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Chair.
so now, any public comment on item number 13?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Christopher Extree on behalf of the California Faculty Association. Don't want to reiterate too much what we said previously. Obviously, just again, want to thank you for the $95 million additional allocation above the governor's proposal. We all know that we have a really long way to go to get back to levels that we were previously funded at before the recession. Again, but do just want to continue to focus that from our perspective, when we increase enrollment, that there needs to be a conversation about allocating funds specifically for full-time tenure-track faculty. We've seen a hiring practice that includes part-time faculty at the CSU level. Part-time faculty are a very, very important part of the mix, but we do just want to continue to reiterate that we feel it's very, very important for this budget and budgets in the following years to include some funding for full-time tenure-track faculty support. So thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Sarah Arce on behalf of the Campaign for College Opportunity. While we do think there's much to applaud in the governor's budget, we do feel it falls short on meeting student demand for a spot in California's universities, so we appreciate the Senate's plan to prioritize enrollment funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Seeing none, we're now prepared to move to a vote on item 13 and then going back to vote to have the other items conform to item 13. So I would ask the staff to please read the motion on item 13.
Approve Senate budget plan for UC and CSU as identified in the charts on attached on page 1 through 3.
Okay, so the chart is incorporated into the motion. So if you If you don't want to approve the chart, it's either up or down on the chart. Okay, so please call the roll.
Senator Block?
Aye?
Senator Morlock?
No.
Senator Allen?
Okay, show that passing 2-1. And now we'll, on items 5, 6, on items 5, 6, 7, 8, 11, and 12. Those are all items we've heard today, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11, and 12. Conforming them to the budget package. We can take them as a group, but if anyone wants to separate any one of those, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11, or 12.
We've already done 6, 7, and 8, I believe, with your last vote.
Okay, this will conform these to the spreadsheet we just voted on. So if you vote against spreadsheet, you probably will vote against this, but that's up to you.
Yeah.
Okay, so please, the motion, I guess, is just to conform the items just read, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11, and 12, to the Senate UC and CSU plan.
Senator Block?
Aye?
Senator Morlock?
No.
Senator Allen?
Okay, thank you. Those are adopted 2-1. We now have 4 more issues on Part B of our agenda. Then we will move back to Part A. I think we have 3 remaining outstanding issues on Part A. So we'll move to issue number 14, which is state authorization trailer bill language.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is there are no dollars associated with this. This is trailer bill only. Existing federal law requires an institution of higher education, in order to participate in the federal financial aid program, to be authorized in any state in which it operates. And so under federal law, authorization has 2 prongs. The first is that you are established by name in either that state's law or by an action of a state entity as established to offer post-secondary education. The second prong is that you are subject to a complaint process by which an individual could submit a complaint to the state about your programs. For public institutions of higher education in the state and for private institutions who are currently subject to oversight by the Bureau for Private Post-Secondary Education, they are able to demonstrate to the federal government that they can satisfy both of those prongs. The independent institutions of higher education in California, those are the largely the private, nonprofit, WASC-accredited institutions. They're exempt from oversight by the Bureau of Private Post-Secondary Education, and so they namely can't, at this point to a provision of state law that subjects them to a complaint process. The administration is proposing trailer bill to allow those institutions to execute a contract with the Bureau in order to provide for a complaint process, in order for those institutions to continue to receive federal financial aid. I just note that the federal government has indicated that it intends to begin to enforce these regulations beginning July 1st, 2015. So there is a bit of an urgency in order to ensure that these institutions can continue to participate in the federal financial aid program.
Thank you. LAO?
Good afternoon. Judy Hyman, Legislative Analyst Office. As Mr. Osmeña explained, this proposal responds to a new federal requirement. And to back up for just a moment, the purpose of this federal requirement is to make sure that states oversee their higher education institutions. And specifically, the federal regulations mention protecting students from fraud and false advertising and that sort of abuse. And this fits in with the national framework for overseeing post-secondary institutions. Generally, institutions are overseen by a triad of 3 independent agencies: the federal government, which sets standards for the financial aid programs, accreditors, which certify academic quality, and states, which are supposed to ensure consumer protection. California is unusual in that it exempts such a large number of schools from oversight. And this proposal is an effort to help many of these exempt schools meet the new federal requirements without actually coming under Bureau oversight. We have several concerns with the proposal. First, we think it's problematic to list institutions in statute as proposed. We think it sets a poor precedent, and we don't think it's necessary. Second, we don't think the proposed language meets the federal intent of ensuring consumer protection. No doubt, the institutions we're talking about, the nonprofit, WASC-accredited institutions, pose very little risk to consumers. They're the ones least likely to take advantage of students. But in the rare event that a student has a valid complaint, the federal requirement is meant to ensure that that student has recourse. And under the proposal, it's unclear what standards a school would be held to, how the Bureau would decide if a complaint has merit, what sort of recourse or resolution it should pursue, and what happens to complaints that the Bureau refers out to other agencies, whether there's any follow-up that would be required by the Bureau. For all other schools that are overseen by the Bureau, the Private Post-Secondary Act has a section on fair business practices that prohibits over-promising employment, misrepresenting how long it takes to finish a program, using deceptive or coercive marketing, just to give you 3 examples. These are basic consumer protections, and the schools that we're talking about should have absolutely no trouble complying with them. In our view, these business practice rules and a complaint process go hand in hand. In our December 2012 report, we recommended creating an expedited approval process that would provide oversight for low-risk institutions, subject them only to the business process rules and complaint process, and would exempt them from burdensome reporting and inspections. For the most part, they'd only interact with the Bureau in the event of a complaint. We still think that's a good option for helping these schools meet federal requirements. You could also potentially do this through the contract process, as the administration proposed, but the language would need to clarify what standards the state would be evaluating complaints against. The staff recommendation is for a placeholder language. So if you do adopt the staff recommendation, you could ask the Department of Finance to work with legislative staff, the Bureau, the Department of Consumer Affairs, and others to strengthen the language and address any of these concerns that you may share.
Thank you. Bureau.
The Bureau supports language to, oh, thank you. It's magic. The Bureau supports language to provide state authorization for independent institutions. We want to acknowledge that the language is still being worked through, and but support the idea behind it.
Thank you. I've got a question. Ms. Simon, the types of complaints, what is the range of complaints that would go before the Bureau under the proposal? Are we just talking business practices? Are we talking sexual harassment complaints, grade complaints, complaints about housing? What's
Sure. I think it's very unclear under the proposal. It doesn't specify what it is that students could complain about and that the Bureau could take action on. In general, I think the Bureau, and perhaps Joanne could answer that, but the Bureau would look for violations of state laws. I think that's why there's a provision in there saying they could refer complaints to other agencies that would be responsible for certain areas. But not grades, not academic complaints. Really, I think what the feds are looking for is consumer protection. So protection from fraud, misrepresentation, generally the sorts of things that have been much more common with for-profit institutions. But it's not unheard of that in a nonprofit institution, a student might feel misled or somehow taken advantage of.
Yeah, I'm going to support this because time is of the essence here that we get our institutions protected. But it seems to me in the next year, we would be wise to look at other ways to go about doing this. I know the Bureau's already seems to be overburdened with what they're trying to do now and not doing it in a very timely fashion. So I don't want to keep, I want to have some organization that has some teeth doing this, or else it's not real.